Hello guys, welcome to the first episode of this series where we are going to learn about MobX in React development. So MobX is used for state management like Zostad, like Redux. So I have already created, a couple other playlists for other, state management options available. But I decided to create this playlist as well because MobX is based on, the ideas from object-oriented programming. So if you're familiar with OOP, you will appreciate the syntax and the way that the syntax of MobX and the way it provides the store for your React applications. In this playlist, I am assuming you're already familiar with React and React development. You kind of know what stores are, what store management, state management means, and you have, already worked a little bit with Redux. And the reason for that is that if you are a little bit familiar with Redux, you will appreciate, the beauty and the simplicity of working with MobX. If you want to learn about, React development, about, let's say, state management using Redux or other options, you can, find other playlists on the channel. If you want to get the code for this tutorial, I've already uploaded the code to my GitHub profile. You can find the link in the description of this video. This tutorial is going to be very practical, very hands-on. We've got like 10 episodes. We're going to study the notes, and I've got on my other, desktop, I've got another instance of VS Code running with this simple React application that I've developed, that I've created using, Vite. I'm running the application right now inside of Chrome. It's a very simple application. I haven't done any specific things, and I'm gonna, as always, create branches for each episode. Right now, we're on episode number 1, and as I said, we're gonna, study the notes, and we're gonna implement the, ideas one by one inside of our application. So again, if you're not familiar with React, with state management, I highly recommend watching the other courses, basic courses that exist on the channel to get yourself familiar with the ideas behind state management. So without further ado, let's get started. So the goal of the first episode, as always, is to get a little bit familiar with MobX, why it is useful for state management in React application, and how to set it up in a simple React application. So what is MobX? MobX is a reactive state management library that makes it simple to connect your application state to the UI. It embraces OOP concept, so object-oriented programming, right? It's a paradigm for developing applications. If you want to know more about OOP, I've got a playlist on the channel about object-oriented programming in C#. So using that playlist will get you up and running, not only with the concepts of OOP, but also with the, with the implementation of OOP, inside of inside of Visual Studio. So I think that playlist is going to be absolutely, beneficial for you. So as we said, it's a reactive state management library. It helps you to, store the state or to maintain the state of your application. It is based on the concepts of object-oriented programming, and it encourages keeping a state in model classes. So you're going to create model classes. And then these model classes are going to update the UI whenever the values inside of them change. So key concepts before we get started. These are the things that we will encounter frequently throughout the course. Observable state. So MobX tracks observable values. So when I say observable, I mean the values that are going to change, are dynamic, are going to change, and whenever they change, you need to update your components to reflect those changes. So those are observable state of your application, or they constitute the observable state of your app. Actions, if you're a little bit familiar with Redux, you know what actions are. Actions are the methods that change the state of your application. For example, if your application state is composed, let's say, of an array of employees, so you can have different actions for adding an employee, deleting an employee, updating an employee, and so on. Then computed values. So computed values are the values that are automatically derived based on other, observable values that you have. So these are not observable values themselves, but they are computed based on the values inside of your observable state, and they're updated automatically when the observable state of your application change. Reactions, effects that run when observables change. So whenever, for example, a value inside of the first name of an employee changes, you want to react to that change inside of your application. So you're going to have reactions. So reactions are effects that run whenever the value inside of your observables change. And observer components are those React components that we render whenever a value inside of the observables changes or updates. So your components are going to be wrapped, right, inside of an observer, and I'm going to show you how to do that in this course. And whenever the value inside of your observables change, those components are going to react, are going to update automatically. So let's set up the project. This is something that I have already done. It's so simple, you can do it as well. I mean, I'm creating a simple React application using Vite. I'm going to name the application MobX Task Manager. The domain of the project we're going to work on is a simple task manager. And I'm going to install MobX React Lite, and then I'm going to install the dependencies. So I can take you to my package.json. And this is what I have here, right? So take a look at the dependencies. I haven't installed the MobX yet. I'm going to do that, and then we will see the dependencies updated here. So after that, we are going to create this structure. So we're going to have a folder called components, another folder called stores, and then the two other files, app.tsx, the main component of our application, and main.tsx. So let's go ahead and install this MobX library, and then we can update the application using the folders that we need here. So I'm going to go ahead and say MobX So as you can see, I've got these two dependencies here, right? And I can also install my dependencies, and everything is up to date now. So I've got these two installed now. Now what I want to do is to create the folders. So I'm going to have a folder for my components. I'm going to have another folder for my store. I'm going to call it stores. So let's continue now. So let's create this simple store, and then I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to tell you what is happening here. But if you take a brief look, it is like a simple class called counter store. I told you MobX is based on the ideas of object-oriented programming. I have this count field, right? In the constructor, I am calling this make auto observable that is imported from MobX, and I am calling this make auto observable, and I am passing the reference to the current instance of this counter store. And then I am creating my actions. So I've got two actions, increment and decrement, that are going to increment and decrement that count state. So let me go ahead and create this simple store, and then we'll come back and talk about it. So I'm going to create this counter store.ts, and then I'm going to write the code. So let me import make auto observable, and let's create the class counter store, creating the field with an initial value of 0, creating the constructor, calling make auto observable, and then creating the actions increment and decrement. So as I said before, if you're a little bit familiar with the concepts and ideas of object-oriented programming, you really appreciate the syntax and the structure of this simple counter store. So everything is very, very easy to understand for people who are familiar with OOP. I've got a constructor, I've got like a field, I've got two methods that are changing that field inside of a class called counter store. And then I am exporting this new instance of counter store using this name. Now let's go ahead and talk about the explanations. Throughout the first episode, because we are getting familiar with MobX, the explanations are going to be very verbose. We're going to examine everything in full detail, but as we progress throughout the course, I'm not going to talk about the things that I have already covered. So we're going to only explain the new concepts as we move forward. So the first one, this simple import, right? So this imports make auto observable. It's a helper function that automatically makes all class properties observable and all class methods actions, right? So it simplifies a state management. So using this piece of code, this means that this count property is now a field inside of your store that you can work with. So it becomes an observable, and an observable means that your component, which is going to be turned into an observer, is going to watch this for changes, and whenever the value inside of count changes, because it's an observable now, the component will re-render. And these are the actions that can change this observable. So using this simple line of code, the fields inside of your class are turned into an observable, and the methods are turned into actions. Now, the next, of course, piece of code is that, class declaration. We're creating this class. This class represents a simple store with one single observable state called count. Count is a class field initialized to the default value of 0. Then we've got the constructor. So this tells MobX to make all fields, like, for example, count, unobservable, and make all methods like increment and decrement actions. So actions are functions that modify your state. If you're a little familiar with Redux, you understand the concept of actions. And then this, automatically tracks the derived values. If you've got any getters or other approaches, other methods of creating computed values or derived values, this piece of code, this single line of code, takes care of that as well. And this, as you might know, refers to the current instance of the store. So passing this to make auto observable hooks kind of hooks MobX into the class instance. So it means that take the current instance of this count store class and turn everything inside of it, the class fields, into observables and the methods into actions. Then we've got two actions. So these are the actions. Actions are the functions that change the observable state of your store. MobX tracks changes to the count observable and reacts in the UI automatically if that is observed by a component, of course. And then we export the store, right? So this creates a single instance of the counter store, like a singleton pattern, right? And this instance is exported so that the other components can import this instance and use this single instance inside of themselves. So the components are going to import this, right? And the components are going to be turned into or wrapped with an observer, and we're going to see how to do that. Now, we have one single store right now. We want to see how we can use that MobX store inside of a simple app component. Let's take a look at the code. The code is this. The most important thing is that the component is wrapped inside an observer, and the observer, as you can see here, is being imported from MobX React Lite. So this is very important. The first thing you need to do is to call this piece of code in your constructor. So that turns everything into observables, and then inside of your component, you need to wrap the code of your component into something called an observer coming from MobX React Lite. So let me go ahead and update the code of my app.tsx. I'm going to remove this code, and I am going to write the new version of app.tsx, importing observer. from MobX React Lite, importing my store, and then wrapping my app component in an observer. So I'm going to return my template. Okay, and let me write export here. I'm going to remove this. So let me refresh. There's an error. It says a stores counter store from SRC. Does that file exist? I think it does. Counter store TS. So let me go ahead and remove the styles that I've got here. No, not in the app.css, instead of index.css, right here. I don't want any styles right now. So as you can see, I've got my single component, and I can start changing the state inside of my store. Now what I want to do is to go through the code that I've got here. So basically, I told you that you're gonna wrap your component inside of an observer, right? And then you are importing your counter store, and you are showing, for example, the value here of the count field inside of the counter store, and then you are invoking the two actions that are defined inside of your counter store, the increment and decrement. Very clean, very easy to understand, and I think very elegant, especially, as I said, for people who are familiar with object-oriented programming. So you've got a class, you've got some fields, you've got some methods. You're going to show the values of the fields here, and you're going to mutate the values here. Very easy to understand. Now let's continue talking about this. Import observer from MobX React Lite. Observer is a higher order function. And for those of you who do not know what a higher order function is, I have already put an explanation here. You see what is a higher order function? We're going to get to this shortly. So observer is a higher order function that turns your React component into a reactive component. So you're going to wrap your component, the component that wants to access the store, with this observer, right? It listens for any observable state changes. If, for example, the value inside of the count changes, and causes the component to re-render automatically when that state changes. So the next step, of course, is to import our store instance that we created inside of this file, right? And then we've got a count property. It is an observable property, and we've got two action methods, increment and decrement. And then we are going to wrap the app component inside of our observer, as I said. So this allows the app component to kind of observe the observables inside of the store. So that means that whenever a change happens to a state inside of your store, the app component re-renders. So this makes the component automatically react to changes in counterStore.count. And then inside of your component, you can start using, for example, your count property. This displays the current value of the count from the store, and because it's wrapped inside of an observer, I mean the component is wrapped inside of an observer, any changes to the count will trigger a re-render of the component, and you make changes to the count using these two action methods. So these buttons call the stores action methods to change the value of the count, and MobX takes care of notifying the component about the change. Now let's talk about a higher order function. So we said that the observer that is wrapping the component that wants to access the store, is a higher order function. So let's talk a little bit about what higher order functions are. So a higher order function is a function that does at least one of the followings. So first, takes another function as an argument, which in this case is true. It is taking our component as an argument, or returns another function as its result. So if a function receives a parameter which is a function, or if it returns an output which is a function, that means that that function is a higher order function. So this is a key concept in JavaScript and in functional programming. Now we're going to talk about this in more detail. So a higher order function is like a function that works on other functions. Example number one, a function that takes another function as an argument. So this is a function, greet, right? And then this is another function called process user input, which takes in a callback. And then inside of this process user input, you're going to create this const, and then you're going to return that callback, and then you're going to pass the name as an input. Now, take a look here. You're going to call the process user input, and as the parameter, which is a function, you're going to pass greet. So this means that greet is going to be called here with this, input. And this name is going to be passed to this greet function here. So we would say that process user input is a higher order function, and the reason for that is that as an input argument, it is receiving another function, which in this case is greet, a higher order function. So here process user input is a higher order function because it takes greet, a function, as an argument. Example number two, when a function returns another function. So take a look at this function, multiplier. It takes in a factor and it is returning another function, right? And this function takes in an x, and then it is returning x multiplied by factor. And then you can call multiplier using this input parameter, using 2. 2 is going to be the factor, and then it returns this function, and then this will be the function double that you can call here inside of console log. And in the output you will receive 10. So in this case, multiplier is a higher order function because it returns higher order function. So yeah, because it returns another function. So always think about it. A higher order function is a function that will either take in a function as an input or return a function as output. And then we're going to run the application. As I showed you, we're going to change the state using those two buttons, and the application reacts. So right now, what we have done is this. We have understood the core principles of MobX. MobX is a stored management library, state management library, or store management library, and it allows you to follow OOP principles and ideas using fields, using methods, and then your component is going to be wrapped inside of an observer, right? And it can be notified about the changes that are happening to the store. And then you're going to see automatic UI reactivity in action because the component re-renders whenever the state of your application or inside of that store changes. And that's it for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. If that's the case, as always, I'd really appreciate it if you could give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next episode.